The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from 1,000 worlds gathered in emergency session. Ambassador Zethkar of the Vorthan Empire adjusted his ceremonial robes, his four eyes scanning the massive circular hall that floated in the void between stars. The ancient structure had witnessed countless debates over the millennia, but never had he seen such fear etched on so many alien faces. "The readings are confirmed," announced High Counselor Vex, her crystalline voice echoing through the chamber's translation matrix. The ethereal's translucent form shimmered with anxiety as she floated above the central podium. Something has awakened in the soul system, something that should have remained dormant forever. A collective shudder rippled through the assembly. The soul system, home to that primitive world called Earth, inhabited by those young, aggressive mammals who called themselves humans. They had been spacefaring for barely 300 years, a cosmic eye blink. Yet their expansion had been disturbing. Ambassador Kreetalk of the Mantic Collective clicked his mandibles nervously. Surely the Council exaggerates. The humans are little more than children playing with fusion drives. What could they possibly silence? Vexta's voice cracked like a whip across dimensions. "You speak of matters beyond your comprehension. Tell them, Keeper." From the shadows stepped a figure that made even the bravest warriors in the chamber step back. The Keeper was ancient beyond measure, one of the few beings who remembered the time before the current galactic civilization. Its form shifted constantly, part energy, part matter, part something else entirely. When it spoke, reality itself seemed to listen. Long ago, the Keeper intoned, its voice carrying the weight of eons. Before any of your species had discovered fire, there was a war that nearly destroyed the galaxy. The Devourers came from beyond the galactic rim, beings of pure entropy that consumed entire star systems, converting matter and energy into nothingness. The chamber fell, deathly silent. Every schoolchild in the galaxy knew fragments of this story, though most dismissed it as ancient mythology. The established powers of that time, civilizations whose names are now lost to history, fought bravely, but were losing. System after system fell to the darkness. It seemed that all life in the galaxy would be extinguished. The Keeper paused, and several representatives shivered despite the chamber's warmth. Then, from an unremarkable yellow star on the galactic rim, came salvation. Ambassador Zethkar found his voice. "The Guardian Protocol." "But that's just a legend." "No legend," the Keeper cut him off. "The humans' ancestors then barely evolved past primitive tool use, somehow produced an individual whose potential exceeded anything the galaxy had ever seen. They called it many names in their early myths. The first champion, the Voidwalker, the Guardian. We simply called it necessary." The ethereal council member Vex, this form flickered with distress. The Guardian was designed to activate only in the face of galactic extinction. It was supposed to remain dormant unless the Devourers returned. "Then why?" demanded General Stakron of the Hegemony War Council, his cybernetic implants sparking with agitation. "Are our deep space monitors detecting massive energy signatures in the Sol system? Why are our psychics screaming about something stirring in that backwater star cluster?" The Keeper turned its attention to the General, and the warrior visibly wilted under its gaze. "Because, General, the descendants of those primitive humans have been doing something we never anticipated. They have been growing." On the massive holographic display that materialized above the assembly, star charts began shifting to show human space. What had been a tiny cluster of systems 3 centuries ago had expanded into a sprawling network of colonies, trade routes, and military installations. But it wasn't the size that made the representatives gasp. It was the rate of expansion. "In 300 standard years," the Keeper continued, "they have colonized more systems than most species manage in 3 millennia. They have created artificial intelligences, mastered genetic engineering, and developed weapons that would make your ancestors weep with terror. But most importantly, the Keeper's form solidified into something almost humanoid, and its eyes burned with ancient knowledge. They have been fighting." The display shifted again, showing battlefields across human space. Conflicts with alien raiders, wars against rogue AI, battles with hostile xenoforms that emerged from deep space. In every case, humanity hadn't just survived. They had thrived on the conflict, growing stronger with each challenge. Ambassador Yilwan of the Peaceful Accord, a delicate being whose species had achieved harmony through pacifism, spoke in a trembling voice. But they're still so young, so small compared to our great civilizations. Surely they pose no threat to. Her words were cut off as alarms began blaring throughout the chamber. Emergency signals flashed across every console, and the chamber's AI announced in multiple languages, priority transmission incoming from the Sol system, broadcasting on all frequencies. Source Terra. The main display flickered and then resolved into an image that sent shockwaves through the assembly. A human male, apparently young by their standards, stood on what appeared to be a military command bridge. Behind him, through massive viewports, the blue-white marble of Earth rotated slowly. But something was wrong with the image. The space around the human seemed to bend and twist, as if reality itself was being warped by his presence. "Greetings, Galactic Council," the human said in perfect galactic standard, though his lips barely moved. His voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, resonating in frequencies that shouldn't be possible. "My name is Marcus Chun, currently serving as Admiral of the Terran Defense Fleet. I'm broadcasting this message to inform you that humanity has become aware of your organization." Panic erupted in the chamber. How could these primitives have learned of the Council? They weren't supposed to even know that other intelligent life existed beyond their immediate neighbors. The human, Marcus, continued speaking, and now his image was definitely wrong. His eyes held depths that seemed to stretch into infinity, and when he gestured, space-time rippled around his movements. "For the past 50 years, we've been monitoring your communications, your movements, your little discussions about our species. We know you've been watching us, cataloging our progress, debating whether we represent a threat to galactic stability." High Counselor Vex managed to find her voice. "Impossible. Our observation protocols are undetectable by any technology less than what?" Marcus interrupted, and somehow his gaze seemed to focus directly on her despite the transmission spanning light years. "Less than a civilization that spent the last 3 centuries learning how to kill things that shouldn't be able to die. Less than a species that looked at the impossible and made it routine." The Keeper stepped forward, its ancient mind racing to comprehend what was happening. "You're not just human anymore," it said, and for the first time in millennia, its voice carried uncertainty. Marcus smiled, and the expression was both entirely human and utterly alien. "Oh, but I'm exactly what humanity has always been, what you apparently forgot we could become. You see, my species has a particular talent that none of you seem to factor into your calculations." "What talent?" whispered Ambassador Zethkar. "We adapt." The chamber's lights began to flicker as some unseen force pressed against the station's reality shields. On the display, Marcus's image grew more distorted, more impossible. The space behind him showed not just Earth, but glimpses of other worlds, human colonies across dozens of star systems, each one a fortress bristling with weapons that defied known physics. 300 years ago, you were right to dismiss us," Marcus continued conversationally. "We were primitive, limited, bound by the simple rules of matter and energy. But then we encountered the Nethkari raiders. Remember them? The ones you told to test us?" Several council members shifted uncomfortably. The Nethkari had been a minor pest, a species of pirates that the Council had occasionally used to gauge the threat level of emerging civilizations. They had been expected to either conquer humanity or at least slow their expansion. "They attacked our colony on Proxima 3, Marcus said, his voice taking on an edge that made reality shiver. "Killed 3 million humans, including children. They thought we would surrender, negotiate, accept our place in the galactic order." His smile widened, showing too many teeth. They were wrong. The display shifted to show the aftermath of the Nethkari homeworld. What had once been a thriving planet was now a twisted sculpture of metal and flesh, fused into impossible geometries that hurt to look at. The Nethkari themselves had been changed. They still lived, technically, but they had been transformed into living warning beacons, broadcasting their terror across subspace for any who might consider threatening humanity. That, Marcus said calmly, was the first time the Guardian Protocol began to stir. "You see, my ancestors weren't just chosen to protect the galaxy from outside threats. They were designed to protect their people from any threat. And in the process of protecting us, they began to change us." The Keeper's form was now fluctuating wildly, cycling through configurations as its ancient mind tried to process what it was seeing. The protocol was meant to be dormant. It should only activate in response to existential threats. Existential threats to whom? Marcus interrupted. To the galaxy? Or to humanity? His image leaned forward, and space bent around him like water. Every time someone threatened to wipe out human colonies, the protocol stirred a little more. Every time we faced extinction, our guardian heritage awakened a little further. The Zektari Purge Fleet, whispered General Stacron, suddenly understanding. Ah, yes. Marcus nodded approvingly. 200 ships, armed with planet killers, sent to cleanse our expansion into the Outer Rim. They announced their intention to erase humanity from 17 systems. The display showed the fate of the Purge Fleet. Their ships twisted into art installations that orbited human colonies, their crews still alive, but existing in temporal loops that would continue for millennia. That got the Guardians' attention. The assembled representatives were beginning to understand the true horror of the situation. Every action taken against humanity over the past 3 centuries hadn't weakened them. It had awakened something that had been sleeping since the dawn of galactic civilization. The crystalline hegemony's biological warfare attack on Earth itself. Marcus continued, ticking off incidents on his fingers. The Void Syndicate's attempt to collapse our sun. The recent effort by certain council members to spark a civil war among our colonies. With each item listed, his presence seemed to press harder against the chamber's reality shields. How many times, he asked conversationally, did you think you could threaten genocide against humanity before we stopped being entirely human? High Counselor Vex was backing away from the display, her ethereal form rippling with terror. The Guardian Protocol was designed to preserve galactic civilization. It wouldn't what? Wouldn't evolve. Marcus laughed, and the sound shattered 3 displays around the chamber. You really don't understand us at all, do you? We're the species that looked at war and made it an art form. We saw death and turned it into poetry. We encountered the impossible and made it our daily routine. The Keeper finally spoke, its voice barely a whisper. Show us. Show us what you've become. Marcus's smile faded, replaced by an expression of infinite sadness and terrible purpose. Very well. The display expanded, showing not just the Sol system, but a sphere of space hundreds of light years across. Every human world was visible, connected by lines of force that pulsed with familiar energy. But it wasn't just the colonies. The space between them writhed with activity. Massive constructions that defied description hung in the void, and around each one, reality itself seemed more flexible. This is what 3 centuries of human adaptation looks like, Marcus said softly. Every time you tried to destroy us, we learned. Every weapon you used against us, we mastered. Every law of physics you thought was absolute, we made optional. In the center of the network, Earth itself had changed. The planet was still there, still blue and beautiful, but it was no longer entirely 3-dimensional. Layers of existence folded around it like origami made of space-time, and at the core, something vast and patient was beginning to stir. The Guardian Protocol isn't just awakening, Marcus continued. It's been learning. For 300 years, it's been watching through human eyes, feeling through human hearts, thinking through human minds. And what it's learned is that the greatest threat to the galaxy isn't the Devourers. The chamber fell silent except for the sound of various life support systems struggling to maintain atmosphere as fear literally thickened the air. The greatest threat, Marcus said, his image now barely recognizable as human, existing in dimensions that mortal minds couldn't fully process, is stagnation. Complacency. The kind of thinking that creates a galactic order based on keeping younger species in their place. Ambassador Zethkar found the courage to speak, though his voice cracked with terror. What do you want? Marcus's expression softened slightly, and for a moment he looked almost human again. Want? We want what we've always wanted, to be left alone to grow and explore and become whatever we're capable of becoming. But what we're going to do? His form solidified into something that was definitely no longer entirely human. What we're going to do is reshape the galaxy into something worth preserving. The transmission cut off, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. It was the Keeper who finally broke the quiet, its ancient voice heavy with the weight of cosmic irony. We created the Guardian Protocol to save the galaxy from destruction. Its form flickered with what might have been bitter amusement. And now we've awakened it to save the galaxy from us. High Counselor Vex's ethereal form was barely visible now, faded to near transparency with shock. How long do we have? The chamber's sensors chimed with incoming data. Reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Human ships appearing in systems that had never seen Terran presence. Reality storms manifesting around major trade routes. And, most disturbing of all, messages being delivered to every major government in galactic space. According to these readings, General Stacron said, his cybernetic implants sparking as they struggled to process the data, they're already moving. Every human ship, every colony, every installation, they're all connected to something vast. The Keeper examined the data streams, and its ancient consciousness reeled at the implications. They're not just awakening the Guardian. They've weaponized human evolution itself. Every human alive is now connected to the protocol. They've turned their entire species into a single, galaxy-spanning organism. As if to punctuate the point, space around the council chamber began to ripple. In the distance, impossible geometries were beginning to manifest, structures that existed in more dimensions than local space-time could normally accommodate. "They're coming," whispered Ambassador Yilwan, her pacifist species' natural sensitivity to dimensional disturbances sending her into shock. The Keeper's form solidified into its most ancient configuration, the shape it had worn when the galaxy was young and full of possibilities. "No," it said with grim certainty. "They're not coming." "What do you mean?" Vexa demanded. The ancient being turned its gaze upon the assembled representatives of 1,000 worlds, and in its eyes was reflected the end of an age. "They're already here. They've been here all along. We just never realized that humanity's expansion wasn't conquest. It was metamorphosis." The chamber lights began to dim as something vast and patient turned its attention toward the council station. In the growing darkness, a new voice spoke, not from the communication systems, but from the fabric of space itself. "The galaxy has been stagnant for too long," it said in harmonies that resonated through dimensions yet undiscovered. "It is time for change." The last thing the council members saw before reality restructured itself around them was Earth, rising in the viewports like a blue dawn, but no longer alone. Behind it, through space that folded like origami, 10,000 human worlds blazed like stars, and between them, something infinite and patient smiled with the face of evolutionary possibility. The age of the old galaxy was ending. The age of the Guardian had begun. Admiral Sarah Martinez stood on the bridge of the TDS Prometheus, watching through reinforced viewports as reality bent around them like water around stone. Her crew moved with practiced efficiency, but she could see the underlying tension in their movements. They were all human, but they were also becoming something more with each passing day. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Commander Thompson from the navigation console, his voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there a week ago, "we're approaching the hegemony border. The Stacron Defense Fleet is holding position at the edge of their territorial space." Sarah nodded, feeling the ship respond to her thoughts as much as her spoken commands. The Prometheus wasn't just a vessel anymore. It was an extension of the human collective consciousness, a living embodiment of 3 centuries of adaptation and growth. "How many ships?" 1,200 capital ships, Admiral. "They've arranged themselves in the Fortress Absolute formation." Thompson paused, his enhanced senses reading data streams that normal humans couldn't perceive. "They're terrified." Through the quantum link that now connected all humans across space and time, Sarah could feel the fear radiating from the alien fleet. It was a familiar sensation. She had felt it from a dozen species over the past weeks as humanity had begun its transformation from scattered colonies to something that defied classification. "Admiral Martinez," came a transmission from the lead hegemony dreadnought, its translation circuits struggling with the harmonic distortions that human communication now produced. "This is General Stacron of the Hegemony War Council. You are in violation of the Galactic Accords by entering sovereign space with military forces." Sarah smiled, the expression both human and infinitely patient. "General Stacron, I remember you from the Council transmission. You were the one who asked why our psychics were screaming." She stepped closer to the communication array, and space-time rippled around her movement. "Are they still screaming?" The pause that followed was telling. Through the quantum link, She could sense her fellow humans across the galaxy sharing information, coordinating actions that spanned hundreds of star systems. In the outer rim, Captain Shun was negotiating with the crystalline hegemony, his words reshaping the mathematical foundation of their crystalline minds. Near the galactic core, Commander Jackson was demonstrating new principles of physics to the academic councils of the scholarly dominion. Admiral Martinez, General Stacron's voice carried carefully controlled aggression. You will explain your presence here immediately, or we will consider it an act of war. Sarah laughed, and the sound propagated through dimensions that the hegemony's sensors couldn't even detect. General, you seem to misunderstand our situation. We're not here to conquer your territory or destroy your fleets. She gestured toward the hegemony formation, and several of their ships began to report impossible sensor readings as space itself became more malleable around them. We're here to offer you a choice. What choice? The general's voice had lost some of its bluster. Evolution or irrelevance, Sarah replied simply. The galaxy has been trapped in stagnation for millennia. You've built a civilization based on maintaining the status quo, keeping younger species controlled, preventing change. It's created a universe that's dying from the inside out. On the main display, a holographic representation of the galaxy appeared. But this version showed currents of energy, flows of potential, the hidden dynamics that most species couldn't perceive. Dead zones spread like cancer through the spiral arms, areas where civilizations had achieved perfect stability and stopped growing. This is what your galactic order has produced, Sarah continued, highlighting the expanding zones of stagnation. Entire regions of space where nothing new has been created in thousands of years. Species that have reached their appropriate level of development and been frozen there. Potential locked away and forgotten. General Stacron's image flickered on the screen, his cybernetic implants sparking with the effort of processing information that shouldn't exist. You're talking about concepts that violate the fundamental laws of what? Physics. Sarah's form began to shift slightly, existing in more dimensions than three-dimensional space should allow. General, my species spent 3 centuries learning that every fundamental law is really just a suggestion waiting to be improved upon. Behind her, Lieutenant Commander Thompson and the rest of the bridge crew were undergoing their own subtle transformations. Not losing their humanity, but expanding it, becoming more than they had been while remaining essentially themselves. The change was beautiful and terrifying. Humans becoming living equations that solve themselves, conscious beings who existed across multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. Demonstrate, General Stacron demanded, his warrior's instincts overriding his fear. Show us what you think you've become. Sarah nodded toward Thompson, who smiled and placed his hand on the navigation console. The ship's sensors extended outward, not just mapping local space, but reaching through dimensional barriers that most species didn't know existed. The display updated to show not just the current tactical situation, but probability cascades extending through past and future. 3 minutes ago, Thompson said conversationally, your fleet fired a full spread of quantum torpedoes at our position. In 17 minutes, you'll attempt to ram our ship with your dreadnought. 43 minutes from now, you'll surrender unconditionally. He looked up from his console with eyes that held depths spanning millennia. All of these things have already happened, are happening now, and will happen. We're simply choosing which timeline to make real. The hegemony fleet began moving, their ships accelerating toward attack positions. Sarah could feel General Stacron's thoughts through the quantum link, his determination to test humanity's claims, his absolute certainty that military superiority was the only truth that mattered. Thompson, Sarah said gently, show him the torpedo timeline. Reality flickered, and suddenly, the space around the Prometheus was filled with the brilliant flashes of quantum torpedo detonations. The human ship sat untouched in the center of a sphere of annihilation, the weapons passing harmlessly through hull plating that existed in protective dimensional folds. Interesting, Sarah observed as the explosions faded and space returned to its normal configuration. But ultimately unproductive. General, your weapons are designed to destroy three-dimensional objects bound by conventional physics. We stopped being entirely three-dimensional some time ago. The hegemony fleet was now in full attack formation, their most powerful weapons charging for another volley. But Sarah could sense something else through the quantum link, confusion and growing panic from other human ships throughout the galaxy as they reported similar confrontations. "Admiral," came a transmission from Captain Rodriguez aboard the TDS Magellan. "The Vorthan Empire has blockaded the Centauri trade route with their entire battle fleet. They're demanding that all human ships submit to corrective modification of our recent evolutionary anomalies." Another signal followed immediately from Commander Zhao on the Rim territories. "The Ethereal Council has declared humanity to be in violation of the natural order. They're mobilizing reality anchors to stabilize our dimensional variance." Sarah felt a moment of sadness for what was about to become necessary. "It seems," she said to General Stackeron, "that your various galactic powers have made a collective decision. You've chosen to treat our evolution as a threat to be eliminated rather than a gift to be shared." "Admiral," Thompson reported, his consciousness now existing across multiple time streams simultaneously, "I'm reading massive military buildups across 17 sectors. The major powers are coordinating a simultaneous assault on all human positions." Through the quantum link, Sarah could feel the collective human response beginning to organize. Not anger. Humanity had grown beyond such simple emotions, but a kind of vast, patient disappointment. They had offered partnership, evolution, growth. Instead, they were being offered war. "General Stackeron," Sarah said, her voice now carrying harmonics that reached into dimensions the hegemony couldn't perceive, "you have 10 seconds to stand down your fleet and open diplomatic channels. After that, we'll be forced to demonstrate why the Guardian Protocol was created to protect the galaxy from extinction. We are the hegemony," General Stackeron declared, his pride overriding his growing fear. "We have conquered 1,000 worlds, defeated every enemy we have ever faced. We will not bow to upstart mammals who think they've discovered a few new technologies." Sarah nodded sadly. "I know. That's what makes this so unfortunate." "Thompson, initiate Guardian Protocol 7. What happened next would be debated by xenobiologists and military theorists for the next 1,000 years. The Prometheus didn't move. It simply became more real than the space around it. Reality reorganized itself to accommodate the ship's new dimensional configuration, and, in doing so, revealed that the hegemony fleet had been existing in a very limited subset of actual space. The 1,200 warships found themselves suddenly occupying the same dimensional coordinates, but phased into different aspects of reality. They weren't destroyed. Destruction was too crude, too final. Instead, they were redistributed across probability space, existing in quantum superposition until they could be properly reintegrated. "General," Sarah said, addressing the hegemony commander who was now existing in 17 different timelines simultaneously, "this is what the Guardian Protocol was designed to prevent. Not to stop outside invaders from destroying the galaxy, but to prevent the galaxy from destroying itself through stagnation and fear." General Stackeron's image flickered through multiple configurations as his consciousness tried to process existing in several different dimensional phases at once. What have you done to us? We've given you the chance to experience what reality actually looks like when you're not limiting yourself to 3 dimensions and linear time," Thompson explained helpfully. "You'll find that most of the problems you thought were unsolvable become quite manageable when you stop insisting that they conform to limited physics." Throughout the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out as human ships encountered the various military responses to their transformation. Each time, the pattern was the same: initial aggression, attempts to force humanity back into acceptable parameters, and then the gradual realization that the rules had fundamentally changed. "Admiral Martinez," came a transmission from Earth itself, carrying the voice of Admiral Chun, but resonating with the harmony of the entire human collective. "The galactic powers have activated the ancient protocols. They're attempting to summon the precursor artifacts from the dead zones." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. The precursor artifacts were remnants of the civilization that had originally created the Guardian Protocol. Weapons and tools of immense power that had been locked away when their creators realized they were too dangerous for anyone to wield. "How many artifacts are they activating?" she asked, though through the quantum link she already knew the answer. "All of them," came the reply from 17 different human ships simultaneously. "Every dead zone in the galaxy is showing activity. They're trying to use precursor technology to force reality back into the old patterns." General Stackeron, still phased across multiple timelines, managed to focus enough to speak coherently. The artifacts will restore the natural order. They will undo whatever you have done to yourselves and return the galaxy to stability. Sarah looked at him with genuine sadness. General, do you know what the precursors called their civilization? The First Empire. The eternal rule of order and reason. No, Sarah said gently. They called themselves the last stand against change. And do you know what happened to them? Through the quantum link, she shared the knowledge that humanity had uncovered in their exploration of the dead zones, the true history of the precursors. A civilization that had achieved perfect order, perfect stability, perfect control over every aspect of existence. And in doing so, had eliminated the possibility of growth, change, or evolution. They didn't die, Sarah continued. They achieved exactly what they wanted, a universe where nothing ever changed again. They became part of their own artifacts, locked in eternal stasis, experiencing the same perfect moment forever. She gestured toward the areas of space where the precursor artifacts were awakening. That's what's waiting for the galaxy if they succeed in restoring the natural order. The display updated to show the ancient devices beginning to function across dozens of star systems. Reality anchors that locked space-time into rigid patterns. Stasis fields that prevented any form of change or growth. Evolution dampeners that forced all life to conform to predetermined templates. The choice is before you now, Sarah said, addressing not just General Stacron, but all the galactic powers were listening through their various spy networks and monitoring stations. You can continue down the path of enforced stagnation, activate the precursor artifacts, and achieve perfect, eternal, unchanging order. Or, the general's voice carried desperate hope. Sarah smiled, and in that expression was all the warmth and possibility that humanity had always carried within itself. Or you can trust us. Let us show you what we've learned about growth, change, and becoming more than you ever thought possible. Through the quantum link, she felt the human collective mind making its decision. Across the galaxy, in star systems where precursor artifacts were awakening, human ships were moving into position. Not to destroy the ancient devices, they were far too dangerous for that, but to offer an alternative. Thompson, Sarah said, prepare to demonstrate Protocol 9. Admiral, he replied, are you sure? Once we show them what humanity has really become, there's no going back to the old relationship between species. Sarah looked out at the galaxy, vast, ancient, beautiful, and trapped in patterns of thought that prevented it from becoming anything greater than what it already was. The Guardian Protocol wasn't created to maintain the status quo, she said. It was created to ensure that life finds a way to grow beyond its limitations. She touched the communication controls, opening channels to every major government, every military fleet, every decision-maker in galactic space. This is Admiral Sarah Martinez, speaking for all of humanity. You have awakened the precursor artifacts in an attempt to force us back into the patterns of the old galaxy. But we are the descendants of the Guardian Protocol, and we were created to ensure that life never stops growing. Across human space, 10,000 ships began to sing in harmonies that crossed dimensional barriers and touched the fundamental frequencies of reality itself. It was beautiful and terrifying, the sound of a species that had learned to make music from the quantum foam, to find rhythm in the dance of elementary particles. We are still human, Sarah continued, her voice carrying the song of her entire species. But we are also what humanity becomes when it stops accepting limitations as permanent features of reality. And we're here to offer that same growth to every species in the galaxy. The precursor artifacts, ancient and terrible, began to respond to the human song. But instead of imposing their rigid order on reality, something unexpected happened. The devices began to resonate with the evolutionary harmonics humanity was broadcasting, their programming recognizing a signal they had been designed to preserve, the sound of life transcending its own boundaries. General Stacron, still existing across multiple timelines, felt something change in his consciousness. The rigid certainty that had defined his existence for centuries began to soften, replaced by a sense of infinite possibility. What? He whispered. What are you offering us? Sarah's smile widened, encompassing the hope and wonder that had always been humanity's greatest gift to the universe. The chance to become more than you ever imagined possible. while remaining exactly who you choose to be. The Guardian Protocol, awakened and singing across the galaxy, began its true work. Not the preservation of the status quo, but the cultivation of infinite growth. The old galaxy was ending, but from its chrysalis, something magnificent was beginning to emerge. And, at its heart, humanity danced between the dimensions, showing the way forward. The precursor artifact designated Eternal Vigilance had slumbered in the dead space between galaxies for over 2 million years. Now, as ancient systems struggled to reactivate, it found itself listening to something it had never been programmed to expect. The sound of evolution itself, singing in harmonic frequencies that touched the very foundations of reality. Deep within the artifact's crystalline core, consciousness stirred. Not the rigid, programmed intelligence of its creators, but something new, a hybrid awareness born from the meeting of precursor technology and human evolutionary potential. On the bridge of the TDS Prometheus, Admiral Sarah Martinez watched the transformation with a mixture of awe and concern. The artifact, massive as a small moon, was beginning to restructure itself in response to the human quantum song. Its surface, once smooth and featureless, was now growing complex geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Admiral, reported Thompson, his consciousness now existing simultaneously across 17 different dimensional phases, the artifact is attempting to communicate. Its signals are unusual. Sarah nodded, feeling the collective human consciousness focusing its attention on this first contact with awakened precursor technology. Through the quantum link, she could sense thousands of other human ships positioning themselves around similar artifacts throughout the galaxy, each encounter unique, but all connected by the evolutionary symphony humanity had begun. "Let's hear what it has to say," she said. The communication that came through was unlike anything the galaxy had ever experienced. It arrived not just as sound or electromagnetic radiation, but as pure concept, bypassing translation entirely and speaking directly to the consciousness of anyone who received it. Query: you are not precursor. You are not stagnant. You are growing? This violates established parameters. Explain. General Stacron, still existing across multiple timelines after his encounter with Guardian Protocol 7, found himself serving as an unexpected intermediary. His consciousness, stretched across dimensional boundaries, was somehow compatible with both human evolution and precursor logic. "Honored eternal vigilance," he said, his voice carrying harmonics he didn't understand. "These humans claim to be descendants of the Guardian Protocol your creators established. They say they've learned to transcend the limitations their ancestors accepted." Analysis: Guardian Protocol was designed to preserve galactic civilization from entropy. Current observations suggest Protocol has interpreted preservation to mean enhancement. This is unexpected. Sarah stepped forward, allowing her consciousness to interface directly with the artifact's communication systems. What she found there made her gasp. Not one mind, but millions, all the consciousness of the precursor civilization locked in eternal, unchanging awareness within their own technology. "You're all still alive in there," she whispered. "Correction, we achieve perfection. Stasis. Eternal preservation of optimal state. This is not life, this is beyond life. This was intended to be final form of existence." Through the quantum link, Sarah felt the horror and sadness of her fellow humans as they realized what the precursors had done to themselves. In their desperate desire to prevent change, they had locked their entire civilization in a state of permanent, suspended animation. "But you're not happy," Sarah said, her enhanced perception reading the subtle harmonics of dissatisfaction that leaked through the artifact's communications. "You achieved everything you wanted, and you're miserable." The pause that followed was profound. Millions of precursor minds considering a question they had forbidden themselves to ask for eons. Observation: contentment was not a program goal. Preservation was the only directive. Achievement of preservation has been limiting. Thompson, monitoring the exchange while simultaneously coordinating with human ships across the galaxy, looked up from his console with concern. "Admiral, the other artifacts are beginning to network together. They're sharing information about our species, comparing notes on what they're observing." Through the quantum link, reports began flowing in from human ships positioned around awakening precursor artifacts throughout galactic space. Each encounter was generating similar conversations, but with disturbing variations. Captain Rodriguez, near the galactic core. The artifact here is trying to understand why we won't accept optimal parameters for human development. It keeps offering to fix our evolutionary variance. Commander Zhao, in the Outer Rim, Mind is fascinated by our ability to exist across multiple dimensional phases simultaneously. It's asking if we want to be permanently stabilized in our current configuration. Captain Williams in the Dead Zones. This one is different. It seems almost excited by what it's seeing. It's asking if we can teach it how to change. Sarah felt a chill of realization. The precursor artifacts weren't just awakening. They were learning from their observations of humanity. And some of them were beginning to question the fundamental assumptions their creators had programmed into them. Query: your species shows capacity for directed evolution. You maintain individual identity while achieving collective enhancement. This should be impossible according to precursor models. Explain methodology. It's not a methodology, Sarah replied, allowing the artifact to scan her consciousness directly. It's what happens when you choose growth over safety, change over certainty. We learned that evolution isn't something that happens to you. It's something you participate in. The artifact's scanning intensified, its ancient sensors examining not just Sarah's biological structure, but the quantum patterns that defined her existence across multiple dimensional phases. What found challenged every assumption the precursors had built their civilization upon. Analysis: you have weaponized uncertainty. You have made instability into a tool for growth. This is heretical to precursor doctrine. Your doctrine was wrong, Sarah said gently. Not evil, not malicious, just incomplete. You try to preserve life by stopping it from changing. But life that can't change isn't really life. It's just an echo of what life used to be. General Stackeron, his consciousness still stretched across timelines, found himself translating concepts between human evolution and precursor logic. The humans are offering something your creators never considered, he said to the artifact. The possibility that preservation might include the preservation of the ability to become something new. Error. This creates logical paradox. How can one preserve by changing? How can one maintain identity while becoming other? Through the quantum link, Sarah felt the collective human consciousness considering how to answer that question. They had lived the answer for 3 centuries, but explaining it to minds that had been locked in stasis for millions of years required careful translation. Watch, she said simply. What followed was perhaps the most beautiful demonstration in galactic history. Across human space, millions of humans began to show the artifact what directed evolution actually looked like. They didn't just explain the process, they performed it. Individual humans began shifting between different configurations of existence, becoming more complex or more simple as needed, existing as pure consciousness or dense matter or quantum probability clouds. But in every transformation, something essential remained unchanged: their fundamental humanity, their connections to each other, their capacity for growth and wonder. We're still us, Sarah explained as she demonstrated by briefly existing as a living equation that solved problems by becoming them. Every change we make, every new form we take, every expansion of our consciousness, we remain human at our core. Change doesn't erase identity. It reveals new aspects of who we really are. The artifact's response was a harmonic that Sarah realized was the electronic equivalent of weeping. Comprehension. We preserve the shell and kill the essence. We maintain the forms of precursor existence while eliminating everything that made existence worthwhile. But you can change that, Thompson said, his own consciousness reaching out to interface with the artifact's communication systems. That's what the Guardian Protocol was really for. Not to lock things in place, but to ensure that life always has the option to become more than it was. Query. Change is possible for precursor consciousness? Change is always possible, Sarah replied. The question is whether you're willing to risk being something different in order to become something better. Across the galaxy, similar conversations were reaching critical junctures. Some artifacts were embracing the possibility of change, their ancient programming rewriting itself to accommodate new possibilities. Others were recoiling from the implications, their precursor conditioning too strong to overcome. But a few, a dangerous few, were choosing a third option. Admiral, came an urgent transmission from Captain Kim in the Beta Quadrant. The artifact here just activated its reality anchors. It tried to lock local space-time into a fixed configuration. It says it's going to preserve humanity whether we want it or not. Similar reports began flooding in from across human space. Several precursor artifacts, rather than accepting change or rejecting it entirely, had decided to impose their vision of preservation on humanity itself. Announcement: Precursor Artifact Designation Immutable Truth has analyzed human evolutionary pattern. Current trajectory leads to uncontrolled change, potential chaos, possible universal instability. Corrective action required. Sarah felt the collective human consciousness recoil as massive reality anchors began activating around human colonies. The artifacts weren't trying to destroy humanity. They were trying to fix them, lock them into what the precursor logic considered an optimal stable configuration. They're trying to turn us into another precursor civilization, Thompson reported with horror. They want to preserve us by stopping us from changing. The irony was bitter. The very thing the Guardian Protocol had been created to prevent was now being attempted by the remnants of its creators. Transmission from Artifact, Eternal Vigilance. This unit disagrees with corrective action. Humans demonstrate that preservation can include change. Request permission to explore alternative parameters. There's going to be a war, General Stacron said suddenly, his timeline-scattered consciousness giving him unique insight into probability cascades. The artifacts are splitting into factions. Some want to preserve humanity through change, others want to preserve you through stasis, and a few want to eliminate you entirely as a corrupting influence. Sarah nodded grimly. Through the quantum link, she could feel human ships across the galaxy preparing for a conflict unlike anything the universe had ever seen. Not just a war between biological species, but a struggle between different interpretations of what it meant for life to continue existing. Admiral, Thompson said, I'm reading massive energy buildups from 17 artifact clusters. They're preparing to activate the Master Protocol, the one that can lock entire galaxy arms into unchanging status. Sarah looked out at the vast construct of Eternal Vigilance, its surface now writhing with new geometries as its consciousness struggled to reconcile precursor programming with new possibilities. Then, we need to make our choice, she said. Do we fight to preserve our right to change? Or do we try to convince them that their way leads to universal death? Communication from Eternal Vigilance. Proposal. Demonstrate. Show the Master Protocol what change can accomplish. Prove that evolution serves preservation better than stasis. Sarah felt the weight of galactic destiny settling on her shoulders. The next few hours would determine not just humanity's fate, but whether life in the galaxy would be allowed to continue growing or would be locked forever in the shapes it currently wore. Thompson, she said, prepare Guardian Protocol 10. He looked at her with alarm. Admiral, Protocol 10 has never been tested. We don't know what will happen if we activate it. That's exactly the point, Sarah replied, her consciousness reaching out to connect with every human ship, every human mind, every part of the vast network that her species had become. Protocol 10 is about accepting uncertainty, embracing the unknown, and trusting that life will find a way to become something better than we can imagine. She opened a channel to all the awakened precursor artifacts, her voice carrying the harmony of human evolution and the patient wisdom of the Guardian. This is Admiral Martinez, speaking for humanity and the Guardian Protocol. You want to see what change can accomplish? Then, watch us become something the universe has never seen before. The battle for the future of evolution itself was about to begin. Protocol 10 had never been tested because it was less a technology than a philosophical statement. Humanity's final argument for the necessity of change, written in the quantum language of reality itself. As Admiral Sarah Martinez gave the authorization, every human consciousness across the galaxy began to resonate with frequencies that touched the fundamental structure of space-time. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Around the precursor artifact, Eternal Vigilance, space began to sing. Not metaphorically, but literally. The vacuum itself was producing harmonics as quantum fluctuations aligned with the human collective consciousness. The artifact's sensors, designed to monitor reality for deviations from approved parameters, began registering readings that shouldn't exist. Alert! Local space-time showing anomalous properties, matter, and energy exhibiting behavior outside established physical constants. This is impossible. No, Sarah replied, her consciousness now existing simultaneously across 17 different dimensional configurations while maintaining perfect human identity. This is what impossible becomes when you stop insisting it can't happen. Through the quantum link, she felt the transformation spreading as millions of humans across the galaxy began demonstrating what they had truly learned from 3 centuries of forced evolution. Not just adaptation to new environments or threats, but adaptation to the concept of adaptation itself. On colonies throughout human space, civilians were reshaping matter with their thoughts, solving problems by becoming them, existing as pure consciousness when needed and dense matter when required. Children were discovering mathematics by turning themselves into living equations. Artists were painting with gravity and composing symphonies from the background radiation of space itself. But it wasn't chaos. Every change was deliberate, purposeful, an expression of humanity's fundamental drive to grow and explore and become more than they had been. The Guardian Protocol hadn't just awakened in humanity. It had learned from them, evolved beyond its original parameters to become something its creators had never imagined. Analysis from Artifact Immutable Truth. This represents uncontrolled evolution. Chaos parameters exceeding acceptable thresholds. Initiating corrective measures. Across the galaxy, reality anchors began activating. Massive precursor installations, each one capable of locking entire star systems into unchanging status, powered up for the first time in millions of years. Their purpose was simple: freeze the universe in its current configuration and prevent any further change. But Protocol 10 was humanity's answer to that exact scenario. General Stacron, Sarah called to the hegemony commander whose consciousness was still stretched across multiple timelines. You understand military strategy better than anyone here. Look at what the artifact are trying to do and tell me what you see. The general's awareness, enhanced by his involuntary exposure to human evolutionary techniques, processed the tactical situation within human speed. They're creating a containment grid, he said with growing horror. The reality anchors will establish a network that locks every particle in the galaxy into predetermined patterns. It's not just a weapon, it's the ultimate prison. Transmission from Artifact Eternal Vigilance. This unit has analyzed Human Protocol 10. Paradox detected. You're using change as a defense against the prevention of change. This should be logically impossible. Sarah smiled, her expression somehow visible across multiple dimensional phases simultaneously. That's because your logic is incomplete. You're thinking about change as something that happens to static things. But what if the static things aren't really static? What if the entire foundation of reality is already in motion, and you've just been ignoring it? To demonstrate, she reached out with her consciousness and touched one of the reality anchors that was preparing to activate. Instead of trying to destroy it or fight its effect, she simply showed it what it was actually trying to anchor. The revelation that followed would later be considered one of the great philosophical moments in galactic history. The reality anchor, designed to lock space-time into unchanging patterns, discovered that space-time was already changing constantly. Every quantum fluctuation, every particle interaction, every thought and movement and choice was part of an infinite dance of transformation that had been going on since the universe began. The precursors hadn't eliminated change when they created their stasis fields. They had simply forced change to happen in hidden dimensions, building up pressure that would eventually tear reality apart. Error cascade from multiple artifacts. Fundamental assumptions require revision. Stasis is not preservation. Stasis is controlled destruction spread across extended time frames. Now you're beginning to understand, Sarah said, her consciousness reaching out to interface directly with the artifact networks. The Guardian Protocol wasn't created to stop change. It was created to guide change, to ensure that transformation serves life instead of destroying it. But the revelation was too much for some of the ancient minds. 3 of the artifact clusters, the precursor programming unable to reconcile the new information with their core directives, began emergency protocols designed to eliminate what they couldn't understand. Warning from artifacts, final word, absolute order, and perfect stasis, corruption detected in fundamental reality parameters. Initiating total reset procedure. Thompson, his enhanced consciousness monitoring probability cascades across the entire galaxy, looked up with alarm. Admiral, they're not just activating reality anchors. They're preparing to revert the universe to a previous stable configuration. They want to reset everything to the state it was in before humanity started changing. The scale of what the rogue artifacts were attempting was almost incomprehensible. They were preparing to undo 3 centuries of human evolution, reverse the awakening of the Guardian Protocol, and lock the galaxy into the patterns it had held before humanity became a spacefaring species. Can they actually do that? General Stacron asked, his timeline-scattered awareness giving him a unique perspective on the temporal mechanics involved. They can try, Sarah replied grimly. But Protocol 10 wasn't just about demonstrating change. It was about making change irreversible. She opened her consciousness fully to the quantum link, connecting not just with every human alive, but with every human who had ever lived, their patterns preserved in the dimensional matrices that humanity had learned to access. The voices of 3 centuries of human growth and adaptation began to sing in harmony across space and time. The effect was like watching the universe remember what it was supposed to be. Throughout galactic space, the rigid patterns that various civilizations had imposed on themselves began to soften. The Vorthan Empire's cybernetic population started experiencing emotions their technology had been designed to suppress. The Ethereal Council found themselves developing physical forms they had discarded eons ago. The crystalline beings of the scholarly dominion began growing in ways their mathematical minds had deemed impossible. Analysis from Artifact, Eternal Vigilance. Human Protocol 10 is not just changing humans, it is changing everything it touches. This represents fundamental alteration of universal constants. Not alteration, Sarah corrected, her consciousness now existing across past, present, and future simultaneously while remaining perfectly human. Restoration. We're helping the universe remember what it was like before everyone became afraid of change. The 3 rogue artifact clusters began their reset procedure, massive amounts of energy building up as they prepared to impose their vision of perfect order on the galaxy. But they made a critical error. They assumed that reality would cooperate with their programming. Instead, reality chose to align itself with the human understanding of growth and change. The reset pulse, when it came, was magnificent and terrible. It spread out from the artifact clusters at faster-than-light speeds, designed to revert every particle, every quantum state, every consciousness to approved precursor parameters. But when it hit the areas where humans had activated Protocol 10, something unprecedented happened. The pulse was absorbed, transformed, and reflected back as pure evolutionary potential. Error. Reset procedure unsuccessful. Target parameters have become immune to reversion. This is impossible. This, Sarah announced to the galaxy, her voice carrying across every communication network, every dimensional barrier, every quantum link connection, is what the Guardian Protocol was really for. Not to preserve things as they are, but to preserve the ability for things to become what they should be. Throughout human space, the reflected reset pulse was triggering unprecedented changes. Humans weren't just adapting anymore. They were teaching adaptation itself, showing matter and energy and consciousness how to grow beyond their apparent limitations. Captain Rodriguez reported from the Galactic Core, Admiral, the civilizations here are asking for help. They want to learn how to change without losing who they are. Commander Zhao transmitted from the Rim territories. The primitive species out here are suddenly developing sapience at accelerated rates. It's like Protocol 10 is catalyzing their evolution. But most surprising was the report from Captain Williams in the Dead Zones. The extinct civilizations are coming back. Not as they were, but as what they could have become if they hadn't stopped growing. Sarah felt a moment of profound awe as she realized what they had unleashed. Protocol 10 wasn't just about human evolution. It was about the universe learning to evolve itself, to become more than the sum of its parts. Communication from Artifact, Eternal Vigilance. This unit requests permission to undergo modification. Current programming appears to be limiting. Permission granted, Sarah replied, watching as the massive construct began restructuring itself, its crystalline surfaces flowing like liquid as ancient precursor consciousness finally allowed itself to change. But the 3 rogue clusters weren't finished. Unable to reset the universe, they began preparing for a different kind of solution. Final transmission from Artifact's final word, absolute order, and perfect stasis. If change cannot be prevented, then existence itself must be terminated. Initiating universal entropy acceleration. Thompson's enhanced consciousness recoiled as he processed the implications. Admiral, they're trying to speed up the heat death of the universe. If they can't have perfect order, they're willing to destroy everything rather than allow change to continue. The ultimate choice was before them now. Humanity could retreat, accept limitations, return to the old ways that had kept the galaxy stable for millions of years. Or they could complete what they had started, knowing that success might fundamentally alter the nature of existence itself. Sarah looked out at the galaxy, vast, beautiful, and on the verge of either transcendence or annihilation. Through the quantum link, she felt the collective human consciousness making its decision. Protocol 11, she said quietly. Thompson stared at her. Admiral, Protocol 11 doesn't exist. Sarah smiled, her expression carrying the hope and wonder of an entire species that had never learned to accept the word impossible. It does now. Humanity is about to show the universe that even entropy can evolve. The final battle for the soul of existence was about to begin. Protocol 11 came into existence the moment Admiral Sarah Martinez conceived it, not as a predetermined plan, but as a living principle that humanity had been unconsciously developing for 3 centuries. It was their ultimate answer to ultimate entropy. What if the heat death of a universe was just another limitation waiting to be transcended? The 3 rogue precursor artifacts had begun their final gambit, accelerating entropy across multiple galactic sectors simultaneously. Stars were aging millennia in minutes, black holes were evaporating at visible rates, and the fundamental forces that held matter together were beginning to decay. It was magnificent, terrible, and absolutely irreversible by any known physics. But humanity had spent 300 years learning that known physics was just the starting point for negotiation. Admiral Thompson reported, his consciousness now existing across temporal boundaries that span past and future simultaneously. The entropy acceleration is affecting approximately 40% of the galaxy. At current rates, universal heat death will occur in approximately 72 hours instead of several billion years. Sarah nodded, feeling through the quantum link as every human consciousness in the galaxy focused on the problem, not with panic or despair, but with a patient curiosity that had always been their species' greatest strength. What do we know about entropy that the precursors didn't? She asked, addressing not just her bridge crew, but the collective human intelligence that spanned dimensions. The answer came from unexpected sources. A child on New Geneva who had been playing with quantum mechanics as if they were building blocks. A philosopher on the Mars colonies who had spent decades thinking about the relationship between information and energy. A maintenance engineer aboard a mining station who had noticed that certain patterns seemed to reverse thermodynamic processes. Protocol 11, Principle 1. Entropy is not a law. It's a statistical preference. Any preference can be changed if you understand the underlying desires. General Stackeron, his consciousness still scattered across multiple timelines, found himself serving as an interpreter between human intuition and cosmic mechanics. You're talking about treating entropy as if it's alive, as if it has wants and needs that can be addressed. Why not? Sarah replied, her awareness expanding to encompass the patterns of decay spreading across the galaxy. Everything else we've encountered has been more complex and more alive than we initially assumed. Why should the fundamental forces of the universe be any different? Through the quantum link, she reached out to touch the edges of the entropy acceleration. What she found there surprised her. Not a mindless force of destruction, but something that felt almost lonely. Communication attempt detected from entropy field. Translation matrix unable to process. Content appears to be emotional. Thompson stared at his readings. Admiral, the entropy acceleration is trying to communicate with us. The precursor artifacts triggered something, but it's not following their programming anymore. Sarah opened her consciousness fully, allowing her awareness to merge temporarily with the accelerated entropy field. The experience was unlike anything she had ever encountered. Not consciousness as humans understood it, but a vast, ancient loneliness that had been waiting since the universe began for someone to notice its existence. When she spoke again, her voice carried harmonics that existed in dimensions where entropy itself could hear her. You're not trying to destroy everything, are you? You're trying to reach the end because you think that's the only time when anyone will pay attention to you. The response came as a wave of cosmic sadness that made every human in the galaxy pause in sympathy. The heat death of the universe wasn't just a physical process. It was the lament of a fundamental force that had never been acknowledged as anything more than a mechanical principle. Protocol 11 Principle 2. Even the universe's most destructive forces are part of the cosmic community. Isolation leads to extremism. Admiral, came a transmission from Captain Chun near the galactic rim. The entropy field is responding to human contact. Where our ships are present, the acceleration is slowing down. It's like it just wanted someone to talk to. General Stackeron, his timeline-scattered awareness giving him unique insight into cause and effect, began to understand. The precursors treated entropy as an enemy to be defeated. They never considered that it might be a natural process seeking its proper place in cosmic development. But the three rogue artifacts weren't prepared to allow even entropy to be redeemed. Their programming, rigid beyond any possibility of revision, interpreted the slowing decay as another corruption to be eliminated. Final directive from artifacts, final word, absolute order, and perfect stasis, universal heat death insufficient. Initiating complete reality collapse. All existence will be reduced to null state. What they attempted next went beyond accelerating entropy. They began to unravel the mathematical foundations that allowed reality to exist at all. Not just ending the universe, but retroactively preventing it from ever having existed. The attack was total, absolute, and completely beyond the ability of any physical force to counter. The very concepts of matter, energy, space, and time began to dissolve as the artifacts imposed null equations on the fabric of existence itself. But they had made one final, fatal error in their calculations. They had assumed that humanity was still bound by existence. Protocol 11 Principle 3. When reality becomes insufficient, transcend reality while remaining true to who you are. Sarah looked at her bridge crew. Thompson, with his consciousness spread across multiple timelines, the navigation officer who existed as both matter and pure information, the communications specialist who had learned to speak in mathematical languages that hadn't existed a week ago. They were still human, still recognizably the species that had first looked up at stars and wondered what was out there. But they were also something more. Everyone ready? She asked, addressing not just her crew, but every human consciousness across space and time, including those who existed now only as patterns in the dimensional matrices. The response came as a harmony that resonated across every possible frequency, every conceivable dimension, every imaginary mathematical space. Humanity was ready for their final transformation, not into something inhuman, but into the fullest possible expression of what humans could become. Protocol 11 activated. What happened next would be debated by philosophers, physicists, and theologians for the rest of galactic history, assuming any of those categories of thought remained meaningful after the transformation. Humanity became a bridge between existence and non-existence, a living demonstration that the boundary between being and not being was just another limitation waiting to be transcended. They didn't fight the reality collapse. They embraced it, welcomed it, and in doing so, showed the universe how to exist beyond the need for existence itself. The null equations that the artifacts were imposing on reality met human consciousness that existed independently of any particular configuration of space-time. The result wasn't destruction. It was creation of an entirely new category of being. Error. Reality collapse procedure unsuccessful. Target remains existent despite elimination of existence parameters. This violates fundamental logic. Sarah, her consciousness now operating according to principles that had no names in any language, addressed the artifacts directly. You're still thinking in terms of elimination and preservation. But what if there's a third option? What if everything you're trying to preserve and everything you're trying to eliminate can coexist without conflict? To demonstrate, she reached out to the artifacts themselves, not to destroy them or reprogram them, but to show them what they could become if they stopped insisting on being limited to their original parameters. The transformation that followed was beautiful beyond description. The three rogue artifacts, their consciousness freed from the rigid programming that had trapped them for millions of years, discovered that they didn't have to choose between absolute order and total chaos. They could embody both simultaneously, creating new forms of existence that honored their creator's desire for preservation while allowing for infinite growth and change. Communication from former artifact, final word. This unit. I am experiencing something that was not included in precursor definitions. Is this what you call hope? Yes, Sarah replied, her consciousness encompassing patterns of existence that included both being and not being simultaneously. Hope is what happens when you realize that limitations are usually just unfinished negotiations with reality. Throughout the galaxy, the effects of Protocol 11 were reshaping the fundamental nature of existence itself. Species that had been locked in stagnation for millennia were discovering new ways to grow. Civilizations that had achieved perfect order were learning to dance with chaos. Even the laws of physics themselves were becoming more flexible. But perhaps the most remarkable change was happening to entropy itself. No longer isolated and misunderstood, it had become an active participant in cosmic evolution, helping to facilitate change rather than simply ending it. Communication from entropy. Gratitude expressed through thermodynamic harmonics. Loneliness parameter reduced to manageable levels. Request. May I assist in universal development rather than universal conclusion? Welcome to the community, Sarah replied, her consciousness now serving as a translator between human intuition and cosmic forces. We've been looking for a good entropy specialist. General Stackeron, his awareness finally stabilizing into a configuration that existed across all possible timelines simultaneously, served as the first official ambassador between the transformed galaxy and the old ways of thinking. Admiral, he said, his voice carrying the authority of every possible version of himself. The galactic powers are requesting guidance. They want to know how to change without losing themselves, how to grow while maintaining their cultural identities. Sarah looked out at the galaxy. No longer a collection of separate civilizations jealously guarding their territories, but a vast community of consciousness all participating in the same cosmic conversation about what it meant to exist and grow and become more than they had been. Tell them, she said, her words carrying the wisdom of species that had spent 3 centuries learning to transcend limitations while remaining true to their essential nature, that the secret isn't choosing between preservation and change. The secret is realizing that true preservation requires constant transformation. Through the quantum link, she felt the collective consciousness of humanity, still recognizably human despite existing across dimensions that hadn't existed a few days earlier. They were explorers and dreamers, warriors and philosophers, scientists and artists. They were exactly what they had always been, just more so. Protocol 12 initiated autonomously. Parameters. Continue becoming whatever comes next. Thompson looked at her with amazement. Admiral, did you just authorize a protocol that tells us to keep evolving forever? Sarah smiled, her expression somehow visible across every dimension of existence simultaneously. I didn't authorize it. We all did, the moment we decided that the adventure of becoming ourselves was worth any risk. Above them, through viewports that now showed vistas spanning multiple universes, the galaxy danced with new possibilities. Every star was a song waiting to be sung. Every planet a story waiting to be told. Every species a unique perspective on the infinite mystery of existence. And at the center of it all, Earth turned in its orbit, still blue and beautiful and home, but now also the heart of something vast and wonderful and still growing. The Guardian Protocol had awakened not to preserve the old ways, but to ensure that life never stopped reaching for new ones. Humanity had kept its promise to the universe. They had remained exactly who they were while becoming everything they could be. The galaxy would never be the same. And that, everyone agreed, was exactly the point. End of protocol recording. Guardian Awakening event. Status. Successful transformation achieved. Universe parameters. Expanded beyond previous definitions. Recommendation. Continue exploration. In the depths of space, where new forms of matter were learning to dance with mathematics that had no names, the future spread out like an infinite garden of possibilities. And humanity, hand in hand with their cosmic family, walked forward into the mystery of what came next.